Midwest Gal 60 writes, if you use sketches, even occasionally, do you prefer them with measurements or without? I've seen some that give only photo sizes, others give all the sizes, and some give you nothing but the sketch. Is one easier to work with than the other? Glitter Gal, can you help Midwest Gal 60 make everything measure up?
Of course I can. Today I'm going to be using the new Wildflower collection from Carta Bella Paper. So I'm going to give you a quick look at that and then get into talking about sketches and various ways that they may be useful. So in the Wildflower collection there's this sheet of different sticker embellishments, and you can start to see the color scheme and the different motifs. So there's a bit of wood grain, there are cameras and feathers, deer that you could use throughout the year, or you could use them in a Christmassy sort of way with a little bit of an alternative color scheme for Christmas. And then there are two cut apart sheets, so one with 3x4 cards that include a variety of the different patterns from the collection and a wood grain on the back, and one with 4x6 cards and this black and white print on the back. Then a variety of full 12x12 patterns. Each one tends to have a bright multicolored pattern on one side and a nice neutral, well, a neutral pattern, something that's a little bit smaller or simpler to the design on the B side. These are Carta Bella papers, so they are slightly textured, a little bit like a watercolor paper, but like the Hello Again collection, what I really like is that they've really saturated the color, so that even though it's a textured paper, you're not getting washed out color. The colors seem to be very true, and they do match well from the sticker sheet to the papers. So I'll just give you a quick look at all the different papers in this collection. And then today I thought we would talk about a few different ways to use sketches and improve your general design skills, if that's something that you're looking forward to doing. This one I'm not sure if you'll be able to see is because of the small pattern. It's not just dots but little sequins. It is a printed paper. I don't mean that the sequins are sewn on or anything like that, but instead of just a bunch of dots, in case that's what it looks like, they are all little sequins. And that lovely watercolor type print on the other side. This photo print that has an arrowhead inspired design on the other side. Blue wash, and then this gorgeous floral. Again, I think this is a beautiful color scheme for autumn pages, but I think especially this paper could really be used well at Christmas. It has just enough red and green to pick that up, and with the little white bits in the flower arrangements makes me think a little bit about mistletoe. I don't want to talk too much about Christmas yet, it's still early. Okay, so that's the Wildflower collection from Carta Bella Paper, and you can find all of those in individual sheets and the collection pack. If you click over, if you're watching on YouTube, click over to 2Ps. There's a link right below the video, and then below the video on 2Ps you'll find a shopping list that has all the different elements that I'll use today, including that full collection. Okay, so what I want to talk about with sketches is that it doesn't really matter which type of sketch you use, if it's one that tells you the measurements of everything, one that tells you the measurements of just the photos, or one that tells you no measurements at all. But I think if you're looking to improve the consistency of your design or the balance of your pages, then analyzing a sketch can be a really, really useful way to get that sort of that skill of how to put a page together, looking at the sketch and then making that happen with all your crafty goodness in your photos. So I have a really simple sketch here that's a design that is not unlike plenty of pages I've made. I have a square background, so that's going to be my 12x12, and two photos, landscape photos today, and I have these two. They're from my backpacking trip, so I'm going to be using craft paper because that's throughout the backpacking album I use that color cardstock, and then the Wildflower collection along with it. So if I look at this sketch, I have two landscape photos, and it doesn't tell me any measurement, but I can tell roughly that these are 4x6 photos. And how I do that is I start to look at the ratio of the size of things on the page. So I know that outer box is my 12 by 12 paper. Or if you're working on 8 by 8, then you would go with the smaller number, but you can still do this. It's all about the ratio. So if that's 12 and this is about half of that, then I know that that's a 6-inch wide photo. So that's a 4 by 6 print, and this is a 4 by 6 print. If I want to make changes to that, of course I can, but I don't need to have the measurements on the page to get an idea of how big something is on the sketch. For example, this column here. Well, what I would do is look at that column and think, how many of those columns could I place along the page until it's full? And I would say that that's about a quarter of the page, meaning I could put 4 of them on the page. So a 12-inch page divided into quarters would mean that that's a 3-inch strip. And I know it's 12 inches here because that's the full size of the page. This one is a nice easy box here. You can tell that that's a pattern paper that's just been cut down a little bit to go on a background that's 12 by 12. So I'm just going to be cutting 1/4 inch off each side, or maybe a little tiny bit more, and that will give me that frame around the edge. So in this case, I'm going to have the craft cardstock around the edge because that runs throughout that album, and then I'll choose a pattern paper to have here as that main part of the sketch. So those are the biggest elements of the sketch already, and I've already decided what size they would be. And it's all just by looking at things and seeing what ratio they are to the full size. Now, if you were working in an 8 by 8 and you wanted to take that same thing, you just need to adjust the numbers. So if your print is half as wide as an 8 by 8 page, then that's not 6 inches wide, it's 4 inches wide. Right? So you would continue like that. This wouldn't be 3 inches wide, it would be 2 inches wide because I could put 4 2-inch columns equals my 8-inch page width. So it's all about looking at what's on the page and then seeing how much more space is there, or how many more times could I do that on the page. If I didn't know that when I use a print, if I'm using a 6-inch print, I tend to use a 4 by 6-inch print. I could do that on the vertical as well, because I can look at this space that's left and think, could I add 2 more photos here? No, I could add 1 more if I moved things around. So I could fit 3 here. So then again, that gives me my 4 by 6 photo on the 12 by 12 page. So I'm going to go ahead and use this sketch plus my 2 4 by 6 photos to bring today's layout together. And I hope that that will be useful for you as you look at other sketches. And we'll talk a little bit about the smaller details on the sketch as we go too. By looking at the sketch, I can cut all the major pieces of paper right away at the beginning. So I know I have my 12 by 12 background, then a pattern paper that's just slightly smaller than that. I have my 3 by 12 inch strip of paper, and then I have my photo with some mats. So I've done one in blue and done one in a wood grain. All these papers are from the Wildflower collection, with the exception of a wood grain from the Amy Tangerine, the new cut and paste collection. So from here, I can look at the sketch and make a few decisions. For example, on the sketch, there are the 2 photos, then 2 mats, and I've cut 2 mats, and then I could decide, do I want more? I could have more papers layered behind there to create more mats, or I might decide that maybe that's too heavy and it'd be better with just the 1 mat. So options like that are really easy to change from the sketch. You can always feel free to add more layers or take away some layers that are present in the sketch. And I can see from this sketch that I have these little border pieces down the side, and then 3 little spots where I'm going to do something with embellishment, and that little border seems to repeat, and I have space for my title and my journaling. So from here I can put all these basic elements together. Now, last week there was some comments about this idea of layering paper like this, where you have 2 layers on the background, and whether you should cut out the backing or not. So to cut away a bunch of the craft cardstock underneath. And here is my answer to that. I I think sometimes yes and sometimes no. It depends on more than you might think. If it's a pattern paper that's being covered up here, if that craft cardstock were a sheet of pattern paper that I absolutely loved, and although I really like it as a border, I also would really like to use it elsewhere, then that's a great case for cutting out the back and using it somewhere else. Also, if both layers of the paper are really thick and will hold all of the things that you want to put on top of that page. So depending on your style of how heavy the embellishment is going to be over the top, the more layers of paper you need in the background in order for your page to hold up well in an album. I'm always creating my pages to work within an album. And I never want to have pages that once I put them in the book, they either dent the other pages or they fall apart. So even though I like that layered look, I'm always trying to find a good balance of having a strong page that will hold all that embellishment without damaging either another layout in the album or falling apart a bit. So in the case of the layout I made last week, one of those papers was rather thin and I knew I was going to put a lot of embellishment on top. In that case, if I wanted it to be sturdy in my album, I'd need to add another sheet of cardstock to make the background heavier. So in that case, it was better for me to not gut the back of the paper, but I don't think that's always the case. I think it really varies on the layout you're making. So you need to make that decision as you go, and I don't tend to make a blanket decision for the whole of all of my scrapbooking. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so getting back to the sketch. I have these major pieces in place. I know I need to put my title in, and on the sketch I have this room for journaling. Well, I also really like this 3x4 card that's in the Wildflower collection, and I'd like to include it over here on the side. I'm not completely convinced about this idea of having wood grain on wood grain. I think there's not enough contrast here between those two layers. So it'd be nice if I can have something that will be a little bit of a border strip there, even though that's not in the sketch. And then as I'm not going to add my writing on top of that little camera, I can just move my wording up here so I can have journaling above here and still have my title below. But the trick that I find with making a change like this to the design and not destroying the feel of the original sketch and that balance is to make sure that when I'm putting something in a place, then I'm looking at where is the nearest place I can move that to so that I'm not creating different areas of the page. So what I really want to do is I see that this is a column of journaling, that if I had a little bit to write, I should just write down here at the bottom near the title. If I have lots to write, then I would continue and I could fill this whole column and it wouldn't change the rest of the page design. If I want to include about this much journaling and also the card, then my best bet is to move that journaling straight up so that my bottom line of journaling is going to come right up to the card, so that this will all feel like one piece of design down the side, instead of having a big gap here where if I start writing and I'm not sure and I don't have enough and then I have a gap here, that's going to feel like this is one block and this is a second block and they're not going to feel connected. So if I'm going to add something in, I want to take whatever I've moved and place it as close to that original place as possible. And I find that that helps keep the design intact, keeps things balanced without sacrificing what I want to put on the page just for the sake of a sketch. So at this point, I want to look at these little border strip options and also find my title lettering. To work with those little border pieces on the sketch, I've just used the same pattern paper from that photo mat to cut some pieces with a border punch. And then also wanted to bring in some yellow. This is a pattern paper that I've used throughout this section of the album, and it just seemed like it would be nice as a little contrasting touch here and there, because then even though I've used different papers throughout all those layouts, there's a little bit of something here and there that will bring it all together and have that little bit of continuity. So I can use the sketch to figure out most of the placement, but I know that I have at least one variation because I want some contrasting color here in between the camera and the wood grain photo frame. So the other places where I've used, where I have the zigzag in the sketch are right down here at the bottom. So I can pop that in place to see where it needs to be trimmed. And that one can go at the bottom of the page there. Then there's also some zigzag along the side down here. And there's some at the top from this corner with the pattern paper. That will all work, and then I can go back to the straight border pieces, and there is one of those here. And I think this yellow will also work well as the contrast piece here. I don't think I'm going to need a third shot of yellow, but I'll keep it handy while I'm working on the page just in case there's anywhere that feels like it could benefit from that little bit of extra color. And with these, I'm just going to ink the yellow and not the blue. And because that blue is a watercolor wash, I prefer it without the ink in this particular combination of papers. But with the yellow, I like the ink on the edge so that it's a bit softer, because the other pattern papers have a bit of a softness to them with either the watercolor effect or the texture of the paper, and this one isn't such a soft pattern. And then I can go ahead and adhere all of these. Here's another thing that can go a little bit askew with sketches, and that's that often on a sketch the title will fit perfectly in a lovely space that works for great balance to the page, but when you come to write that out in the letters of your actual title and the font that you want to include, it may not take up the same amount of space. So here, instead of having a title that neatly goes all the way to the edge, my title is too short, so I want to figure out how I can adapt that. And one of the ways I tend to do that is to use the larger letter stickers for one or a few words of the title, and then complement it with smaller letter stickers so that I can include a larger title without it being really big and heavy as if I'd spelt the whole thing out with these letters. These are collage stickers in the new Amy Tangerine line, by the way. Okay, so I was going to add in these yellow smaller letter stickers, and I tend to keep the journaling in mind when I'm making longer titles. So I know that what I want to write about this is that we showed up to do a hike at this particular place, which is where they filmed the Hobbit scenes in the Lord of the Rings films. And as soon as we got there, you can see that this sky is very gray. Well, it absolutely bucketed down. And although we were not completely dismissive of the idea of taking a hike in so much rain, the person who leads the hike said no way, he wasn't going. So the story I want to tell is that we showed up, we went to Hobbiton, but we didn't actually do the full trip. So here I'm starting to get more balance on this side, but I still have this space over here. And when I started with this set of letter stickers, for whatever reason on other pages that I've used all my letter E's before I've run out of everything else. So I can't use this to spell something here like hike or journey or adventure, because all of those have E's. So sometimes it's worth keeping both letter sticker sets in mind, and that gives you the freedom to be able to just include a little bit more in the larger size. So let's see how I can get this to balance. And I think it just helps to keep in mind that sometimes with a sketch, it works to be flexible with things like the wording of your title or the font that you're going to use, so that you can find something that's a nice balance between exactly what you want to include and using that design that you've chosen. Those eyes are not in any way lined up, so let me see if I can get that back in line with this one. That still needs a little bit more to balance, but I think it's a good start, and I can also get my journaling in place here, then come back for the embellishment to finish the page. To finish, I tend to go back to the sketch and look at the placement of the embellishment, and that's almost always the last thing that I do on a page, so that I make sure I have everything else in place first. And then I don't feel like I have to worry. I can just embellish until I'm happy with everything. So this one has 3 spots, and it's a little circle, and then I can put whatever embellishment I want on top of that. I like sketches that leave the embellishment a little bit free like that, because then you can choose whether that's a great opportunity for you to use a pre-made item, or whether you'd rather use something that's that's something that you can build out of the items in your stash or your scrap papers or anything like that. So in this case, I'm going to do a little bit of both. I'm starting with my circles just punched from a scrap of paper. This is an older Studio Calico paper with tiny little geotags on the design, so that works well for a travel page. And just punched it with a circle, and then I'm going to pop these into the 3 spots where they are on the sketch. And this one at the bottom is going to need to be trimmed. The other 2, I could just tuck it into the edge. Nope, a bit more. Should work. There we go. And then I'm going to add some bits on top. So I thought with the geo-printed papers, and where I've put in a bit of that yellow, I really liked this mix of just a tiny bit of orange. So these are geotag stickers from Skipping 5. And I can just repeat. And I do like that with sketches like this, you could make 3 completely different embellishments, or you can make the same embellishment 3 times. Because you're just looking at the placement, and then you have the freedom to choose whatever is going to work best on your layout. I still have a little bit of space, and I've purposely put that off the center so that then I can add some stamps. And since this is a story about things not going quite to plan, this seemed like a pretty good time to use my little phrase stamps. I even have one that says, "When it rains, it pours," so that's a pretty literal example for this page, but I'm just going to use a different phrase next to each of these and have the text run up next to the sticker. And since I did my journaling in brown ink, I'm going to use brown ink for the stamping as well. My final few decisions with a layout, even if they're from a sketch, tend to be from the other things in the album. So I've balanced these letter stickers here with a few just in the corner here. That's something that repeats throughout these pages in my album. The other spot I thought I might put them was here, but I just looked at both and preferred them at the bottom corner. And then just a few droplets of mist in the top and bottom corners. Neither of those elements are on the sketch, but they're things that repeat throughout that stage of my album, and I like the continuity that they give from page to page. So that way I can use all different supplies for the album, but the pages all look like they go together well. So I hope that that gives you a little bit of a good steering point in choosing a sketch and then making it work for you. And it might be that the sketch that you love has all the measurements, and then you can just cut them on your trimmer and off you go. But if you come across a sketch that you like and you're trying to figure out how that page works, or if you're looking at a layout that you really like, and the layout obviously wouldn't have measurements in the description usually, so you can use the same tactics of looking at the elements that you do know the size of and figuring out what ratio of the page they are. So something like the 12 by 12 background, you're probably going to know, you may be able to identify what's a 4 by 6 or a 2 by 3 photo, for example. I hope that helps, and this week your challenge is to take a sketch. You can use this one, or you can use any other sketch you would like, and go through the steps from start to finish with your layout and see how you go, and tell us a little bit in that description box below your layout how you got on, how you use the sketch to help your design, and maybe what bits you discarded or what bits you changed, or did you stay exactly true to it. Give us a little bit of insight into your creative process. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.
Join us next week for the continuing adventures of Glitter Girl and the ongoing mystery of the scrapbooker behind the mask at twopeasinabucket.com.